The old grandfather clock in the corner of the small London apartment chimed midnight as Sarah Mitchell finished her last cup of tea. She had been working double shifts at the local hospital for 3 weeks straight, and her tired eyes could barely focus on the medical reports scattered across her kitchen table. Tomorrow would be different, though. Tomorrow, she would finally have a day off to visit the Royal Palace Gardens, something she had promised herself for months. Sarah had moved to London from a small village in Yorkshire 2 years ago, chasing her dream of becoming a pediatric nurse. Life in the big city was nothing like she had imagined. The rent was expensive, the work was demanding, and most days she felt invisible among the millions of people rushing past each other on the busy streets. Her parents back home often asked when she would visit, but Sarah was too proud to admit that she could barely afford the train ticket. The next morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, a rare gift in the usually gray London weather. Sarah put on her best dress, a simple blue one that her grandmother had given her, and made her way to Buckingham Palace. She had heard that the changing of the guard ceremony was something every person in London should see at least once, and today felt like the perfect day for new experiences. As she approached the palace gates, Sarah noticed hundreds of tourists gathered with cameras and phones, all waiting for the ceremony to begin. She found a small space near the black iron railings and stood quietly, watching the crowd buzz with excitement. Families from different countries spoke in languages she couldn't understand, but their smiles were universal. The ceremony began with the sound of military drums echoing through the courtyard. Sarah watched in amazement as the guards in their red uniforms and tall black hats marched in perfect formation. Their movements were so precise, so disciplined, that it looked like a carefully choreographed dance. For a moment, she forgot about her tired feet and empty bank account, lost in the majesty of the ancient tradition. One guard caught her attention more than the others. He was tall, with kind eyes that seemed to notice everything around him, even while maintaining his stoic expression. There was something different about him, a gentleness that contrasted with the military precision of his role. Sarah found herself watching him specifically as the ceremony continued. When the formal changing was complete, most of the crowd began to disperse. Sarah lingered, not ready to return to her small apartment and the pile of bills waiting on her table. She walked slowly around the perimeter of the palace, enjoying the peaceful gardens and the way the afternoon light filtered through the ancient trees. As she rounded a corner near a less crowded section of the grounds, she noticed the same guard from the ceremony standing alone near a side gate. He had removed his ceremonial hat and was running his fingers through his dark hair, looking exhausted. Without his formal headpiece, he looked younger than Sarah had expected, probably close to her own age of 26. Their eyes met across the small garden path, and for a moment, neither looked away. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment at being caught staring, but the guard smiled slightly, an expression that transformed his entire face from stern military bearing to warm humanity. "Beautiful ceremony today," Sarah said softly, stepping closer to the gate that separated them. "Thank you," he replied, his voice carrying a slight accent that Sarah couldn't quite place. "Are you visiting London?" "I live here, actually, but this was my first time seeing the changing of the guard. I'm Sarah." "James," he said, extending his hand through the gap in the gate. His handshake was firm but gentle, and Sarah noticed small calluses on his fingers from years of military training. They talked for nearly an hour, sharing stories about their very different lives. James told her about growing up in a military family, how he had joined the Royal Guard straight from school, and how the discipline and honor of the position meant everything to him. Sarah shared her journey from Yorkshire, her struggles as a new nurse, and her dreams of making a difference in children's lives. What struck Sarah most was how James listened. In a world where everyone seemed to be rushing to speak, he gave her his complete attention. asking thoughtful questions about her work and her hopes for the future. When she mentioned feeling lonely in the big city, his expression softened with understanding. "I know that feeling," he admitted. "Even surrounded by tourists and fellow guards every day, it can be isolating. The uniform creates a barrier between you and normal human connection." As the afternoon sun began to set, James glanced at his watch with obvious reluctance. "I have to report back soon, but would you perhaps like to walk through St. James's Park sometime? When I'm not on duty, of course." Sarah's heart skipped, but she tried to keep her voice casual. "I would like that very much." They arranged to meet the following Sunday near the park's lake. As Sarah walked home that evening, she felt something she hadn't experienced since moving to London. Genuine excitement about the future. She had made a connection with someone who seemed to understand her struggles and appreciate her dreams. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself thinking about James constantly. She wondered what he was like when he wasn't in uniform, what made him laugh, what his hopes and fears were beyond his military duties. She had never been particularly interested in dating, focusing instead on building her career. But something about James felt different and significant. Sunday arrived with a light drizzle, but Sarah's spirits remained high as she made her way to St. James's Park. She wore the same blue dress, hoping it would bring good luck. James was already waiting by the lake when she arrived, dressed in casual clothes that made him look like any other young man in London, except for his perfect posture and alert eyes that still scanned their surroundings with professional awareness. Their first official date was simple, but perfect. They walked around the lake, fed ducks with bread James had thoughtfully brought, and talked about everything from their childhood memories to their favorite books. Sarah discovered that James read poetry in his spare time and dreamed of traveling to places where he could experience different cultures without the formality of his military role. As they sat on a bench watching children play near the water, James turned serious. "Sarah, I should probably mention that my position comes with certain restrictions. We're not supposed to get involved with civilians, especially not publicly. If my commanding officer knew about this..." Sarah felt her heart sink, but James quickly continued. "That doesn't mean I want to stop seeing you. It just means we need to be careful, at least until I figure out how to handle the situation properly." The secrecy felt both exciting and troubling to Sarah. She understood the complications, but couldn't help feeling like she was asking James to choose between his career and any possibility of a relationship with her. They agreed to continue meeting quietly, always in places where they were unlikely to encounter other guards or military personnel. Over the next several months, Sarah and James developed a deep and meaningful relationship built on stolen moments and careful planning. They would meet in small cafes far from the palace, take long walks through lesser-known parks, and sometimes James would visit Sarah's apartment late at night when he was off duty. Their relationship grew stronger with each secret meeting, but the constant need for discretion began to wear on both of them. Sarah started to question whether she could build a real future with someone whose career required him to keep their relationship hidden. She loved James deeply, but the secrecy made her feel like she was living a double life. Her friends at the hospital began asking why she seemed so happy lately, and Sarah struggled to share her joy without revealing the truth about her mysterious boyfriend. The situation became more complicated when Sarah's parents announced they would be visiting London for her birthday. She desperately wanted James to meet them, to be part of her real life instead of existing only in the shadows. When she mentioned this to James, she saw the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to meet her family, but doing so would risk exposing their relationship to a wider circle of people. Their secret world was about to face its biggest test, and neither Sarah nor James knew if their love was strong enough to survive the challenges that lay ahead. The decision came suddenly and unexpectedly. Sarah's parents arrived in London on a Thursday evening, bringing with them the warmth and love she had missed desperately. Her mother, Margaret, immediately noticed the change in her daughter. Sarah seemed happier, more confident, and there was a glow about her that hadn't been there during their last phone conversations. "You look wonderful, love," her father, Robert, said as they sat in Sarah's small apartment sharing fish and chips. "London is treating you well?" Sarah smiled, fighting the urge to tell them everything about James. Instead, she focused on her work at the hospital, sharing stories about the children she cared for and the progress she had made in her career. But her parents knew her too well, and they could sense there was something more. On Friday night, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She called James and asked him to meet her parents, not as her secret boyfriend, but as a friend who had shown her kindness in a big city where she had felt lost. James hesitated, understanding the risk, but the hope in Sarah's voice convinced him. They arranged to meet at a small restaurant in Camden, far from any areas where James might be recognized by fellow guards. Sarah's parents were charmed by James immediately. He was polite, well-spoken, and clearly cared deeply for their daughter. Robert, a former factory worker with a good eye for character, appreciated James's honesty and work ethic. Margaret loved how James looked at Sarah as if she was the most important person in the world. During dinner, James shared carefully edited stories about his work, describing it as security services, without mentioning the Royal Guard specifically. Sarah's parents assumed he worked in private security, and neither Sarah nor James corrected this impression. The evening was perfect until an unexpected moment changed everything. As they walked back to Sarah's apartment, a group of tourists recognized James from the changing of the guard ceremony. One young woman approached excitedly, asking for a photo with the handsome royal guard from Buckingham Palace. James politely declined, but the damage was done. Sarah's parents now knew exactly who he was and the significance of his position. That night, after her parents had gone to their hotel, Sarah and James sat in her apartment discussing what had happened. Robert and Margaret had been understanding but concerned, asking gentle questions about the complications of Sarah dating someone in such a high-profile position. "They're worried about you," James said, holding Sarah's hands across her small kitchen table. "And they're right to be worried. If this relationship becomes public, it could affect both our careers." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. "Are you saying we should end this?" "No," James said firmly. "I'm saying we need to make a choice. Either we keep hiding forever, or we find a way to make this work openly, whatever the consequences might be." The next morning brought an unexpected twist. James received a call from his commanding officer requesting an immediate meeting. Someone had posted photos from the restaurant on social media, and military intelligence had identified James in the images. The photos showed him in civilian clothes with Sarah and her parents, looking like any normal young man enjoying dinner with his girlfriend's family. When James arrived at the meeting, he expected disciplinary action or possibly dismissal from the Royal Guard. Instead, his commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, surprised him with a different conversation entirely. "Sergeant Mackenzie," the colonel began, "these photos have been circulating online, and there's significant public interest in the story. The public seems to find it charming that one of our guards has found love with a dedicated NHS nurse." James sat silently, unsure how to respond. Colonel Harrison continued, "The royal family's public relations team has reviewed the situation. Miss Mitchell has an exemplary record as a healthcare worker, and your own service record is impeccable. Rather than viewing this as a problem, they see it as an opportunity to show the human side of our institution." The colonel explained that the royal family had been working to modernize their public image, showing that they valued normal human experiences and relationships. A love story between a royal guard and a nurse who dedicated her life to caring for sick children could actually strengthen public support for the monarchy. "However," Colonel Harrison added, "this would mean your relationship would become very public. There would be media attention, interviews, and scrutiny of both your lives. Are you prepared for that? James asked for time to discuss this with Sarah before making any decisions. That evening, he explained the situation to her, and they faced the most important choice of their relationship. They could continue hiding and hope no one else recognized James, or they could embrace the public attention and see where it led them. Sarah was terrified of the media attention, but excited about the possibility of being open about their relationship. She had grown tired of the secrecy and wanted to build a real future with James. After talking through the night, they decided to accept the public nature of their relationship. The announcement came the following week through official royal channels. A simple statement explained that Sergeant James Mackenzie of the Royal Guard was in a relationship with Sarah Mitchell, a pediatric nurse at London Children's Hospital. The statement emphasized both individuals' dedication to public service and asked for privacy as they navigated their relationship. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. Social media filled with supportive comments about the real-life fairy tale and praise for both James's service and Sarah's medical work. News outlets picked up the story, but most coverage was respectful and focused on the positive aspects of their relationship. However, the attention was more intense than either had anticipated. Photographers waited outside Sarah's apartment and the hospital where she worked. Journalists called her parents in Yorkshire asking for interviews. The hospital administration was supportive but concerned about disruptions to patient care. 3 months after going public, Sarah and James had adapted to their new reality. They learned to navigate media attention while maintaining their professional responsibilities. Sarah became an unofficial spokesperson for NHS nurses, using the platform to highlight the challenges and importance of healthcare work. James continued his duties as a Royal Guard while also participating in public engagements that showed the human side of royal service. Their relationship deepened through these challenges. They learned to support each other through difficult moments and celebrate successes together. Sarah's parents visited more frequently, proud of their daughter's poise in handling the unexpected fame. James's family, who had initially worried about the media attention, gradually embraced Sarah as part of their family. The most significant test came when James was offered a promotion that would require him to leave the Royal Guard for a position in military intelligence. The new role would be less public, but would require extensive travel and potentially dangerous assignments. Sarah supported his ambitions, but worried about what this change would mean for their relationship and their future together. As they stood in their favorite spot in St. James's Park one evening, watching the sunset reflect off the lake where they had shared their first official date, James took Sarah's hand and asked her a question that would determine their future together. The answer she gave would not only change their lives, but would eventually inspire millions of people around the world who were following their story. The question hung in the evening air like a promise and a prayer. James had dropped to one knee beside the lake, where they had fed ducks on their first date, holding a simple but elegant ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Sarah looked down at the man she loved, seeing not the famous Royal Guard that the media wrote about, but the gentle soul who had listened to her dreams and supported her through every challenge. "Sarah Mitchell," James said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you marry me?" Sarah's answer came without hesitation. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, neither of them noticed the photographer hiding behind nearby trees, capturing the moment that would soon appear on front pages around the world. The image would show James in his civilian clothes, kneeling beside the peaceful lake, with Sarah's face radiant with joy and love. The engagement announcement created an even bigger media sensation than their initial relationship had. The palace released an official statement congratulating the couple and announcing that the wedding would be a small, private ceremony with close family and friends. However, public interest was so intense that the palace eventually agreed to allow limited media coverage of the event. Planning a wedding under such scrutiny proved challenging. Sarah wanted a simple ceremony that reflected their genuine love, rather than the public attention surrounding them. James supported this vision completely, having grown uncomfortable with the constant media presence in their lives. They chose a small church in Sarah's hometown in Yorkshire, hoping the rural location would provide more privacy than a London venue. Sarah's parents were overwhelmed with joy, but also worried about the logistics of hosting such a high-profile event in their small village. The local community rallied around them, offering help with everything from flowers to security. The village priest, Father MacDonald, who had baptized Sarah as a baby, insisted on performing the ceremony despite offers from more prominent religious figures. As the wedding date approached, Sarah made a decision that would define her legacy. She announced that instead of accepting wedding gifts, she and James were asking for donations to establish a scholarship fund for young people from working-class backgrounds who wanted to pursue careers in healthcare or public service. The fund would be called the Midnight Promise Foundation, referencing the late-night moment when they had first met. The response was extraordinary. Donations poured in from around the world, from wealthy benefactors and ordinary people who had been inspired by their story. Within weeks, the foundation had received enough funding to offer dozens of scholarships annually. Sarah worked with educational institutions to create a program that would provide not just financial support, but mentorship and guidance for scholarship recipients. James's decision about the military intelligence position became easier once he saw Sarah's passion for the foundation work. He declined the promotion and instead requested a transfer to a position that would allow him to be involved in the foundation's work, while continuing his military service in a different capacity. The palace supported this decision, recognizing the positive impact the couple was having on public service recruitment and community engagement. The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather and unprecedented security measures. The small Yorkshire village was transformed, with discreet security personnel positioned throughout the area and media representatives carefully managed to respect the family's wishes for privacy while still documenting the historic event. Sarah walked down the aisle of the small stone church wearing a simple ivory dress that had been designed by a young British designer who was also a scholarship recipient from a similar program. The dress was elegant but understated, reflecting Sarah's practical nature and desire to avoid excessive displays of wealth. James waited at the altar in his dress military uniform, looking more nervous than he ever had during Royal Guard duties. When Sarah appeared at the church entrance, escorted by her father, James's face lit up with the same gentle smile that had first caught Sarah's attention during the changing of the guard ceremony. The ceremony itself was intimate and personal. Father MacDonald spoke about love that grows stronger through challenges, referencing the couple's journey from secret meetings to public scrutiny. Sarah and James had written their own vows, promising to support each other's dreams and to use their platform to help others achieve their own aspirations. The most memorable moment came during the exchange of rings. As James slipped the wedding band onto Sarah's finger, church bells began ringing throughout the village, a sound that carried across the Yorkshire countryside and seemed to announce to the world that love had triumphed over all obstacles. The reception was held in a large tent on the grounds of Sarah's childhood home, with decorations featuring wildflowers from the local meadows. The guest list included Sarah's colleagues from the hospital, James's fellow guards, both families, and several scholarship recipients who had already benefited from the foundation's work. During his speech, James surprised everyone by announcing that he and Sarah had decided to donate the proceeds from their wedding photos and interviews to expand the scholarship program internationally. Sarah taught me that true service means giving others the opportunities we've been fortunate to have, he said, looking at his new wife with obvious admiration. Sarah's response brought tears to many eyes. When I moved to London, I felt invisible and alone. James not only saw me, but helped me realize that our individual stories become powerful when we use them to lift others up. Today isn't just about our love story. It's about the beginning of many love stories for people who will now have chances they might not have had before. The foundation grew rapidly after the wedding, eventually expanding to multiple countries and supporting thousands of young people pursuing careers in healthcare, public service, and community development. Sarah left her hospital position to work full-time on the foundation, while James took on a role coordinating veteran services and community outreach programs. Their first child was born 18 months after the wedding, a daughter they named Hope Margaret Mackenzie, honoring both their optimistic outlook and Sarah's mother. The birth announcement included a request for donations to children's hospitals instead of gifts, continuing the pattern of using their public platform for charitable purposes. 5 years after their chance meeting at Buckingham Palace, Sarah and James had become global advocates for public service and education equality. Their story was featured in documentaries, books, and academic studies about how personal relationships can create positive social change. Universities offered courses analyzing their foundation's model for combining celebrity platform with meaningful charitable work. The most significant impact came from the thousands of young people who received scholarships and went on to become nurses, teachers, social workers, and community leaders. These scholarship recipients often spoke about how Sarah and James's story had shown them that ordinary people from modest backgrounds could make extraordinary differences in the world. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Sarah and James returned to St. James's Park, where they had shared their first official date. They brought their daughter Hope and walked around the same lake where they had fed ducks and talked about their dreams. The park was busier now, partly because their story had made it a popular destination for couples, but they found a quiet bench where they could sit and reflect. "Do you ever regret how public our life became?" Sarah asked, watching Hope toddle toward the water with James following close behind for safety. James considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret some of the intrusion and stress, but I can't regret the opportunity to help so many people. That midnight kiss at the palace gate changed not just our lives, but thousands of others." Sarah smiled, remembering that James had never actually kissed her that first night. Their first kiss had come weeks later, during one of their secret meetings in a small cafe. But the media had romanticized their initial meeting, and the midnight kiss had become part of their legend, even though it wasn't technically accurate. Looking around the park at families enjoying the peaceful evening, Sarah saw several young people wearing hospital scrubs and university badges that she recognized from their scholarship program. These young people were living their dreams because 2 strangers had met at a palace gate and decided that their love story could become a platform for helping others. As the sun set over London, Sarah realized that their greatest achievement wasn't the media attention, the royal connections, or even the successful marriage. It was the proof that ordinary people, when they choose love and service over self-interest, can create ripple effects that touch millions of lives around the world. Their story continued to inspire new generations of young people who learned that real fairy tales aren't about princes and princesses, but about finding someone who shares your values and working together to make the world a little bit better for everyone who comes after you.